Hey, what's up, guys? Chris here, Prodigy Maker Show, episode 29. We are live Thursday night. It's a late night show. I'm sorry for going on late for those of you who are tuning in live, but I was working late on court and I had some late lessons, so we're getting the show on now, closer to 10 o'clock. Normally we go around 9:45, but whatever. Doesn't matter the time. We're going to talk some tennis tonight. As always, the show will be about high-performance junior development. Tonight I want to talk about Toni Nadal. I want to get into the mind of Toni Nadal. I've got to get warmed up here. I've got to put on my Spanish glasses, my Spanish headset, and start thinking in the Spanish way, but specifically the brand of tennis, the system, the method of Toni Nadal. I've got to get into Toni Nadal's brain, get that mind meld going, and try to share with you my thoughts about his system and his approach to the game, which I find really interesting. And I think as I get more into it, I'll get heated up and I'll get excited to share with you what I've been learning from Toni. I've been studying Toni's method for a long time, but he's notorious for being very secretive. So in the past 2 years, he came out with a bunch of online courses actually for coaches and parents. So I'd like to sort of talk about some of those courses and some of his philosophy, the drills that he uses, and his approach. And, really was for the first time that Toni started sharing his knowledge. He spent a couple decades or so on tour with Rafael, and he garnered this incredible experience traveling with arguably one of the greatest players of all time. I think Rafael Nadal will probably go down in the history books as one of the greatest players ever. And so Toni has this amazing all these experiences to share, where he took this kid, his nephew, as a little boy in Mallorca, on the island of Mallorca, off the coast of Spain, raised him up to be this incredible champion. So I just would like to sort of get into all of it, the way he did it, and his philosophy in training Rafael, and the drills that he used, and also touch on some of the character building aspect, because I think for Toni, building character is paramount, and it's a really important part of his philosophy. So I would like to also sort of get into at least some parts of Toni's character building approach. His method for doing that as well is really kind of interesting, I think, and a unique take on character. And I think it's important, not just for tennis players, but probably to develop better human beings in the world. I think, I'll get into it a little later, but I think that the approach that Toni takes, his philosophy would be a good model probably for the entire world to follow. And we would have better citizens and a better world if we followed Uncle Toni, right? So Sammy is not here tonight. Sammy, you want to say hello? No. I think Sammy's going to take a nap. Let me check really quick. You want to say hello? Or you're good? Go night-night. All right, he's hopeless. He's not helping. Yeah, go night-night there. If he pees on the couch, I'm going to be really upset, guys. Okay, let's say a little prayer, if you believe in God, that Sammy will not pee on my couch. And let's get this show rocking. If you have any questions, guys, on Spanish tennis, I know it's a late night, but if there are any Spanish fanatics out there like me who want to learn more about Toni Nadal or his method, or just Spanish tennis in general, training questions, drills, I did write the book on Spanish tennis, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis. And if I might say so, it's a great read. And if you're interested in Spanish tennis, I highly recommend it. And I also have an online school that is like a Spanish academy online, where I'm trying to build it that way. And we have a number of courses online where you can learn about Spanish type training, Spanish approach to building the forehand or footwork, and there are a number of classes that we're producing for the online school that are heavily based on the Spanish model. Have a lot of Spanish influences. In Spain, and this is one area I'd like to talk about as much as I can with the hour or so that we have, is talk about the different strains of Spanish training. Does that rhyme? The strains of Spanish training. And there's a number of lineages in Spain. You have the Pato Alvarez lineage, which connects to Emilio Sanchez and Sanchez-Casal, and they have a very famous academy in Barcelona. And you have the Bruguera lineage or strain, or those two are clans. They are basically clans, and then they're families, or they're families with a similar approach to building players. And those two, Bruguera clan, Bruguera lineage, very much like, it reminds me of religious lineages, like gurus and their followers, and then their followers of followers, and the generations go on like that. Well, in Spain, they have these lineages in the same way. And you have the Bruguera clan, and you have the Pato Alvarez family of coaches who believe in his method. And you have the Nadal clan. You have the Nadal lineage in Mallorca, which is an island not far from Barcelona, also part of Catalonia, the Catalonian part of Spain. And so in Catalonia itself, you have these three main branches of methodology, philosophy on training, developing players. And what fascinates me the most, having spent so much time in Spain, are the comparison and contrast between those three primary strands, those three primary branches. And that's what I spend most of my research time when I'm reading online, or I'm reading books, or doing research for articles and other. I'm working on some new books coming out in the next year or two. It's been maybe I have had to put a slowdown on my production schedule because we have a new baby. We got baby Ocean, and so as I told you guys on the previous show, I've been kind of stuck the last 6 weeks. We have a brand new baby, so it's my fourth kid. So we got a full house here, and I've been stuck in the house a lot, basically babysitting, taking care of my little one. She's beautiful. I love doing that. But I'll tell you funny stories. I usually take her on long walks, which allow me to listen to podcasts and get some education. But today, for example, I took a long walk with my daughter, and I put her in a wrap on my chest. So I have my baby on my chest, and I'm either listening to a podcast every day. If you want to know what my daily life is like, I'm listening to a podcast and walking like crazy up hills, or even inside. We have a 4-story house, so I'm walking stairs in my house, and I'm listening to I listen to a lot of different tennis podcasts to stay on the pulse, in touch with the pulse of the tennis industry. And today I was listening and watching some of the online video course of Toni Nadal, which I've been studying voraciously in the past year and a half. I went through all of the courses that Toni offers. I believe there's one course I haven't done yet, but I'll tell you what they are. So there's a mentor course, which is the basic beginner course for parents, but I think it's so valuable for coaches. I think coaches would really enjoy that. And then there's the intermediate course and an advanced class, a course of classes. So there's 3 main Toni Nadal programs that he offers, and I think there's one more that is like a wisdom course that I haven't signed up for, because I think it is redundant with the mentor course, but I have to check on that. But anyway, so there's 3 or 4 different courses, and it's just been incredible for me. I mentioned it on the previous show that taking these courses online has been a tremendous learning experience for me and made a big difference in my coaching in the last year or two, in my philosophy. And especially this year, I'm going back through all of the coursework. It's a tremendous volume of work. It's up to 36 classes within each course, and the videos with Toni are between 15 minutes to 30 minutes long, sometimes a little longer. So it's a tremendous amount of material that Toni put into the online courses, and it's kind of what I expected. I expected that anything from Toni is going to be high quality, and he's going to do it very seriously. He's going to engage himself very well, and that is part of his philosophy, that you need to engage yourself in everything that you do and put your heart and soul into all the work in front of you. Every moment, every skill that you're learning, he says to engage yourself and to do it to the best of your ability. And so it's no surprise to me that the courses that Toni offers online to coaches and parents and players are very, very high quality. They're very well produced, and they go into a lot of depth, and they cover a lot of breadth as well of different topics within his method. So I'm extremely impressed with the courses, and I'm not getting any remuneration by saying that. I just want to let you guys know that I'm not, I don't have any referral or arrangement with the Nadal courses. I just honestly just wanted to review them. I haven't seen any reviews online from anyone, and I wanted to talk about, some of the philosophy in the courses and the method itself, and how good these courses are. I think it's possible that I'm biased or I don't want to say not jaded. It's possible that I'm biased because of all the years I've spent in Spain. The courses mean a lot to me personally because I can see a lot of interconnections between other lineages in Spain, and I can compare and contrast Toni's approach with other great coaches in Spain like Pato Alvarez or Luis Bruguera, or there are many others as well whom I've studied with. So for me, it's just an amazing opportunity to learn a system from Toni and Toni's approach to developing players, because before he was so secretive. He didn't share anything when he was on tour with Rafa, probably for good reason. He didn't want people to know what he was doing with Rafa. He didn't want to reveal any secrets that might give Rafa's opponents an edge. But now it seems that he has settled down in Mallorca. He's involved with the academy, and I'm not sure what the impetus was for developing the courses. I think he wanted to share his incredible knowledge and experience from traveling for so many years on tour. And I think there was a bona fide, sincere, I think he was very sincere that about sharing this knowledge of his very incredible, unique experience that he had, raising up one of the greatest players of all time from a young age. Not many people on the planet can say that they've done that or had the experience of doing that. It's very rare to take a kid from a very young age and develop them into a multiple Grand Slam winner. I think 19 Grand Slams now. I don't know anyone who's done that off the top of my head. Maybe the only person close might be Richard Williams, perhaps, or I don't know if I can think of anyone else, because even someone like Boland, who is famous for developing so many top players, didn't take them from under 10. I know that Rafa started with Toni when he was younger than that. So very unique perspective that Toni had of a young athlete growing up and then becoming a world-class junior and then eventually a tremendous professional player, one of the greatest players of all time. Really fascinating journey. Imagine being in Toni's shoes and experiencing those years, year after year. Must have been an amazing experience for him, just as a coach. I get the sense that Toni, he wasn't a very good player, and you can see in the videos, that's one thing, he can't play very well. He doesn't have really very good technique either. So you get a lot of inside. You get an inside look at Toni working on the court, which is unusual, especially with different levels of players. You see him working with young players, under 10, like total beginners. So in the mentor course, he's working with very young players. You see him working with intermediates and then advanced players. So he seems a lot more comfortable with the advanced players. If I might, try to give you the straight dope here, like straight my perception as a high performance coach, as a junior developer is, what I read from watching Toni work is he looks a lot more comfortable with the advanced juniors. He looks a little more unsteady with the youngest ones, the kids who are not well formed. And, he's he has an interesting court presence. He's very serious, very tough. But he has, occasional moments of great sense of humor. But you can feel that his energy and intensity when he's on the court working with players. I think that's something that he talks about. He talks a lot about that the coach has to have a strong court presence and the coach has to be very demanding. He's a big believer that coaches need to demand a lot. Parents too. He believes parents should be very demanding of their players. And he believes in the body language of a coach. He believes it's very important for the coach to be energized and strong and to be involved with the player, to be an inspiration and a motivation for a player. So you see that he demonstrates that himself working with his students. The courses are really interesting in that they're filmed at the Nadal Academy. I've been there. I've watched Toni work live at the Nadal Academy, and I've also interviewed him for an article for a tennis magazine that I wrote. So I do have some firsthand experience with Toni as well, but not to the extent that I never had access to him the way he gives access in these courses online. Incredible that he gives so much information and time. He lets the cameras in to see him working with different groups and levels of players, which is just incredible. The other thing that's really amazing about the courses is they're all translated. That's the thing. They are. It must have been a painstaking job. So because the courses are all in Spanish, right? And the company that produced them, they had to hire a translator to translate the courses, and they're in multiple translations. So you can have the classes translated into English, which helped me a lot because my Spanish is not very good. And actually, my Spanish is becoming better by listening to the classes all the time. The last year or two, I've been studying these classes regularly, and I think it's actually helping my Spanish, although my Spanish may be very much influenced by Toni's language and his accent and things like that, which is fine, I guess. If you're going to mimic the language of someone from Spain, I guess the good choice would be Toni Nadal. So the course is helping me with my Spanish and also helping me a lot, of course, with the coaching side of things. So where was I? These classes are just amazing that he took the time to produce this much material. So I don't like the word content, but in terms of video content, it's just hours and hours of time that he dedicated. 36 class. Just do the math. 36 classes per course, half an hour, 15 minutes to half an hour or more per class, 3 or 4 courses. It's a lot of material. He must have prepared a lot. You can tell that everything is well organized in the courses, and he put a lot of time and thought into sharing his method. You can see that he was very sincere and earnest about sharing his philosophy and his approach to training players. And I appreciate that, because there are many online courses that are they're just not that good, not that well organized, and they don't have, you feel that they were not done very professionally. So these courses are extremely professional, and you can tell that Toni's a guy who is busy, who's got being pulled a lot of different directions from folks, and that the fact that he was willing to do this and make all these videos, take the time to bring the cameras in to watch him work on court, to share his, he calls them tips or consejos. So he has the way the courses are done is he basically has, in each class, he goes through a lesson, a lesson that he might do with a group of players at that appropriate level, and then at the end he has a time that he gives tips or counsel or advice, and those are, I think, I found the most interesting of all the parts of the course, where he gives he kind of shares his wisdom about junior development, or about strategy, or about parenting, or psychology. It's really fascinating, and I think at some point in the future, I'm just going to collect, or maybe write an article, or share more about just the wisdom parts of his classes. So it's interesting to learn the drills and the exercises, and how he interacts with players and builds players. But at the same time, the wisdom, the theory, the philosophy part of the class, it's not necessarily broken down easily. You have to watch all of the videos and get to the end to listen to the wisdom part. But I think those wisdom parts of the classes are incredible, amazing. There's a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge that he shares, but they're at the conclusion of each video. So you've got to go through each one sort of laboriously and watch all of the drills, which some are good, some maybe are not so great. We could talk about that if you guys are interested in some of the drills that Toni uses. And you have to get to the end of each class to sort of get this dose of wisdom from Toni. And that, I think, is incredibly valuable for parents and for coaches, and eventually for players. Obviously, players would benefit from that as well. Guys, I see a lot of waves. Some old friends tuning in and some new friends. Thank you so much for supporting the program. I apologize for getting on late. If you do have any questions, please let me know. We are talking Spanish tennis. We're talking Toni Nadal. We are going to talk a little bit about the serve later, because I have a mailbox question on how to build the serve and some kick serve drills for kids under 10. So I had a friend from India who's a fan of the show, and he sent me some questions about how to build serve and what exercises to use for U10. So I'm going to try to describe those and maybe link to some resources for that later. But we're talking junior tennis. We always talk junior tennis development. Let me know if you have any technical questions or any questions about junior development. And, the main topic of the show tonight is Spanish tennis. Thank you guys for all the waves. Episode 29 of Prodigy Maker Show. And, yeah, we're doing it. 29 episodes and going strong. Got lots of new show ideas on tap. And we get a lot of requests for different topics. And the audience of the show is steadily growing. So I thank you all for that. I appreciate you supporting the program. So Toni Nadal, how do I get into this guy's brain? This guy, can you imagine? Let me just talk about what it must have been like when, let's say you're a club coach and you're coaching some good juniors and you have a chance to work with the young Rafael Nadal. Imagine the luck, just the sheer luck. It's kind of like hitting the lottery, right? It's kind of like getting the Mega Millions lottery ticket, and your brother's son. It's your brother's son, so it's someone in your family, and you make a deal with the dad that you'll be in charge of the kids' training. So that's kind of what Toni did. If you read Rafael's autobiography, great autobiography, by the way, Rafa. Toni somehow sidled in there, and he was able to take over all of Rafa's training at a young age. I don't remember exactly the age, but under 10. And turns out that the kid that you're training is one of the greatest athletes of all time. What are the chances? You know, what luck. Incredible for Toni. And you get the sense from watching Toni on video, just, you know, me getting to know him, also from the time I spent interviewing him, that he really wanted to be, I think, famous. You know, I think this is my opinion, my interpretation, but you get the sense that he really wanted to be a famous coach, a guru, and he's a philosopher of the game. You know, he has a gravitas to him. He speaks with great authority, and he speaks like a guru, like a philosopher does. He makes broad generalizations about life and tennis, and he's very good at extrapolating thematic elements from specific stories and training experiences. And I think that's one of his strengths. He has a great mind, a great philosopher's mind, and he has a high intelligence. You can tell he's quite bright. And so I can imagine when he was just a club coach. You know, he wasn't a professional tennis player. He was, I think, a pretty good soccer player. And he was working at a club in Mallorca, and he was probably thinking to himself, like most young coaches do, is where am I going to find my champion? And where am I going to find a player who can take me to the top of the world and so I can become famous or well known, or I can get the respect that I deserve. And he did it. You know, he did it, and he did it in the most fantastic, fabulous way. This player that he found, his nephew, not only became a great player, but one of the best of all time. 19 Grand Slams now, if I'm not mistaken. How many Roland Garros? 11? At least. I mean, it's an incredible accomplishment. So it's basically every high-performance junior coach's dream. It's a dream that, I'll admit it, I've had that dream to have a chance to work with a Grand Slam player. Forget one of the greatest players of all time. How about just a Grand Slam player, right? Incredible experience, incredible moment in time where he was able to find this young kid and help develop him into such a great champion. I know that most high performance coaches, people that are in the junior development community, we all dream of that. We all dream of having that experience, of finding the golden ticket, you know, the hitching your wagon to a superstar. And we all have that experience on certain levels. You know, I've had a lot of good players who I've developed, top 10 players in the U.S., which is pretty good, you know, to have a junior who is one of the best in the country. I've coached dozens and dozens of top nationally ranked kids, but never have I met someone yet who achieved as much as someone like Rafael Nadal. And most coaches, even the greatest coaches, some of the greatest coaches in the world, can't claim anything close to what Rafa and Toni did together. It's maybe once in more than one generation this can happen. A great player like that, and so it's quite remarkable that he has this story and he's willing to share it now. And so I think it's really interesting from that perspective. Like I mentioned before, I don't know if everyone's going to enjoy the courses the way I have, or the way I'm enjoying them now, because I have this unique background vis-a-vis Spain. But I think there's a lot of value, and I will be sharing more and more writing and doing more videos. I think in a future podcast and show, we will talk about more about the intermediate training course and the advanced training course, just to sort of give you a taste of what Toni's method is for those levels as well. Tonight I'm focusing a little more on philosophy, a basic philosophy of Toni and his fundamentals approach, particularly in the mentor course. He calls it the mentor course, which is the first course for beginners. But we can talk a little bit about it, the intermediate course as well. And then I think in another podcast and show I will save. It's a lot to cover, so I will try to sort of break up some of his method into parts and share them on future shows, if that makes sense to you guys. This show, I will try to share more about the mentor course and maybe a little bit about the intermediate course, and just sort of get into the mind of Toni, sort of introduce you guys to what he's all about and his core philosophy and things like that. All right, so mentor course, beginning level, the beginning level for Toni. Interesting that you see a coach who has a few core beliefs. So the number one with a big exclamation point for Toni is the accompaniment of the ball. And he's obsessed with this idea of meeting the ball with a good relationship with the body and extending through the impact. And he calls that the accompaniment. And he says it's really important to accompany the ball well, so that way the ball comes inside the strings of the racket. So imagine that impact, the ball decomposing. If you ever seen a high-speed video of a ball hitting the strings of a racket, and the ball usually collapses. It collapses into the strings, and then it gets sent out on a rebound. And so that's kind of what Toni's talking about with the accompaniment. He says it's very important to let the ball inside the strings of the racket, and then to send the ball out with a long extension. And reminds me very much of the philosophy of Luis Bruguera. Luis Bruguera is a little older than Toni. He trained his son Sergi Bruguera to win the Roland Garros 2 times in 1993 and 1994. And I see a lot of similarities between the Bruguera method and the Toni Nadal method, and that's something that I find fascinating. I don't know if it's too esoteric for you guys, or if it's like something that the average person in tennis has no interest in. But I find it very, very interesting with my personal background traveling and studying in Spain, and I spent so many years with Luis Bruguera and learning his method. So to see the similarities between the Nadal system, the core system, the basic philosophy, the basic approach to training, the method, to compare it, to see the similarities with the Bruguera method, to me are fascinating, and to try to find the connections. So this is one area where the connection is very, very strong. And for Luis Bruguera, he also is similarly obsessed with the line of the shot, which is the same as Toni, exactly the same. They are obsessed with the meeting the ball with a good relationship to the body, which is typically out in front and at a comfortable height and at a good distance from the body, and then extending out through the impact and throwing the racket forward and up, lifting and extending through the shot. And they believe that is extremely important to the control of the shot and the power of the shot. And it's an absolute obsession. I'm stressing that because it's a word that Toni uses hundreds and hundreds of times in his online course, and that it is very similar to it's the same concept that Luis Bruguera uses at his academy and all his coaches use, which is called the line. They call it the line, and Toni just calls it the accompaniment. And I'm sort of wondering if, did Toni actually take that from Luis and just rename it? Because it's so similar, it's very striking to me, very salient that he focuses in on this aspect of hitting the ball the same way that they do in the Bruguera system. So I'm wondering, Toni's a little younger. Luis started to have a lot of success in the early 90s, and I'm wondering if how much Toni was influenced by Luis. And I actually am going to call Luis and ask him, because I'm curious if maybe Toni came to some of Luis's workshops, or if at some point Toni spent time with Luis studying with him, made a visit maybe to Bruguera Academy back in the day, or somehow had access to some of Luis's philosophy and system, because I see so many similarities between the Nadal system and the Bruguera system at the fundamentals level, the core philosophical level, that I'm wondering if Toni was somehow exposed to that maybe in the early 90s. Bruguera started to have big success in the 80s and the early 90s, and he was a little older than Toni. So I'm wondering how much of an influence the Bruguera method had on the Nadal method. And I'm always looking for more and more interconnections between those two methods. Very interesting. At the same time, there was another successful coach, Pato Alvarez, whom I mentioned, who was more a part of the Sanchez lineage, the Sanchez clan, and he had a slightly different approach with a series of drills that were unique to him. And he was very focused on his baskets and the drills that he did. They are geometrically patterned drills that he linked together and chained. And for Pato Alvarez, he was also older than Toni, and he probably undoubtedly influenced Toni to some extent, but I don't see the same parallels or interconnections between the Nadal approach and the Sanchez system, which was started by Pato Alvarez. Pato Alvarez initially designed the Sanchez system, and then Emilio Sanchez and Sergio Casal took the Pato Alvarez method and sort of made it into their own as the Sanchez-Casal, the academy philosophy that they have. But in any event, I don't see as much of an interconnection between those two systems as I do with the Nadal system and Bruguera. So just kind of interesting, maybe only for you Spanish nerds out there, Spanish tennis nerds out there, but I find it very interesting. I see more and more parallels between Bruguera and Toni than I do between Pato Alvarez and Toni. However, for example, there are commonalities between all three that are just generically Spanish, and you can even see that in other parts of the country, going down to Alicante and training in Valencia, which tend to have slightly different approaches than they do in Catalonia. But in general, I would say that you do see common themes throughout all three of those lineages, all three of those systems. For example, a common one is that there's an in and out in tennis. So there's a give and a take, and that players shouldn't just park themselves on the baseline. Toni believes that. Luis Bruguera definitely believes that. Pato Alvarez is maybe the greatest proponent of that. He created the X drill, which is the in and out drill, the most famous drill in Spain. And so that is a really common philosophical component of all Spanish systems. And so between those three lineages, the Pato Alvarez lineage, which is the Sanchez-Casal approach, and the Bruguera lineage, and the Toni Nadal system or method, between those three, the idea of the in and out, the give and take is definitely a big similarity and a common theme between all three. So what else is Toni obsessed with? So in the early system, the early years for him, he believes in, like many Spanish coaches do, training movement and making sure a player is well balanced. I'll be honest with you, I find the method for young children insufficient in terms of the technical approach. I find the technical approach to be very old school and classical, and that would be another interconnection with the Bruguera system. I think the Bruguera system is also a little bit outdated in terms of the technical approach, and what I mean by that is both Luis Bruguera and Toni Nadal, and also Pato Alvarez. So this is you have the triad here of slightly older coaches, older generation of coaches, even though they're not in the exact same generation. But you see an emphasis on closed stance. You see an emphasis on following through classically above the shoulder to the neck. Nadal is obsessed. Toni Nadal is obsessed with following through around the neck. Strangling yourself around the neck, the way old textbooks show follow-throughs. He's really huge on that follow-through to the shoulder, above the shoulder, around the neck, which I find to be kind of a turn-off. I think it's time to move beyond that. So it's not very modern. He doesn't stress any open stance for the young kids. Everything is mostly grounded, so that the players are on the ground. For the young players, I'm talking about young development. I'm under 10 generally. The players need to be grounded, closed stances, typically neutral to closed stances, conservative, very conservative grips. Tony's a big believer in conservative grips because he thinks they'll slip as the player gets older, which is a common phenomenon, to be honest. But he's not alone in that regard. And he has very, very traditional follow-throughs. He wants the players to extend, which he calls accompany the ball, and he wants the accompaniment. And he wants the follow through around very high around the ear or the neck. He said la muñeca. He talks about the la muñeca all the time, and so that's a huge thing for him. One thing that Tony's obsessed with the young ones is the rhythm, el ritmo, the rhythm of the stroke, and this is fascinating for me because with Tony, the rhythm is not what we typically call rhythm in the U.S. For Tony, the rhythm of the stroke is more the forward swing, actually. The forward swing up until the finish of the shot, that's what he's focusing in on as the rhythm, which I find really interesting. It's an unusual focus for a coach to describe rhythm, because for me, my first understanding, and at first I misinterpreted this when I was watching Tony's classes, is that the rhythm is not necessarily the backswing to forward swing and then finish. It's literally focusing on the impact and what the racket and arm does from the impact up until the end of the stroke. So it's from the accompaniment phase to the follow through. And for Tony, that follow through should be around the neck. It should be high and classic, which I don't like, but who am I to argue? He's had many more Grand Slam winners than I've had. I currently have no Grand Slam winners who I've developed. But hey, I'm still young. Who knows? I don't know if I'll ever get lucky enough to have a Rafael Nadal, but I'm always trying. So he believes in this rhythm. He's obsessed with the rhythm of the shot. And so what he calls rhythm, I think that Luis Bruguera would call, I don't think Luis has a name for it, but I think he might be interested, and he would observe rhythm very carefully. It would be important to Luis in the sense that you have to have great balance through the shot. And for Tony, rhythm and balance are intertwined, because if you don't have a good rhythm, you usually don't have a good stability in the shot. So Tony is obsessed with the rhythm from the contact point up to the finish. And what he's looking for is a good accompaniment, which is a good extension through the shot, and then a good hold or pause at the end of the stroke. So this is a huge thing in the Toni Nadal method and philosophy. He wants he calls una pausa. He wants a pause at the end of the stroke. And he equates it to a golf swing or a basketball shot or a soccer kick. And he says there are commonalities in all sports, and all sports require a rhythm when shooting or when hitting or when performing the skill. And for him, the rhythm for the tennis stroke is critical, absolutely crucial. And he spends a lot of time with the young kids trying to foster that rhythm. What it looks like, and I can't demonstrate it here in my kitchen, but basically it's a deliberate swing, it's a slower controlled swing, it's a rhythmic swing with fluidity and with a calmness to it. What Toni says is you cannot have abruptness in a stroke, especially at the younger years. Remember, this is for the beginning level players. This is for, I'm pulling this information from the course that Toni created for young players, just learning the game under 10 years old. And some of this information applies to older players as well, but the focus is on younger players in this sense. And so the players have to have this beautiful rhythm. They have to have an accompaniment of the ball and a good pause. And you know you have a good pause at the end if you're stable. So it's a way of measuring stability, and it's a way of not rushing the shot. Toni is obsessed with the players hitting the ball slowly with control. And that is everywhere in Spain, not just in the Toni Nadal way. It is in the Bruguera method. It's in the Pato Alvarez system. It's everywhere that you must have good control. You must have good control of your body, su cuerpo. You must have good control of your balance. You must have good control of your technique. Everything needs to be in control. And so for Toni, if there's abruptness, if there's sharpness, if there's an edge to the swing, and I mean in terms of the mechanics now, if there's any sort of rashness of movement, anything too abrupt and sharp, then the stroke won't be developing properly. And so he wants rhythm, he wants fluidity, he wants good balance, and ultimately very good control of the racket and the swing mechanics. And I would say that is a very common theme all across Spain. They spend a lot of time on the rhythm, and some other systems don't call it rhythm, but it's basically the control of the swing and control of the body. And you can't have any of that if you don't have balance, right? So in Toni's approach, the footwork is paramount. The footwork is a huge priority. And that is also a very common thing among all systems in Spain. The emphasis on the piernas and los pies, the feet and the legs, and the work of the legs. The work of the legs to get the body into position to hit a shot with balance and rhythm and control. The control happens when you have good footwork. So Toni's obsessed with that with young kids, right? But the way he does it, some of the drills that he uses at the lower level, I'm not that impressed with, to be honest. I think that I've seen better systems I think the Bruguera system is much better in terms of the drills, the specific drills that they use in the Bruguera method for young kids. I think it's more simple, even more simple than Toni's, but Toni believes in simplicity. But the drills that he chose as standard fundamental drills for U10 players, I think could be better. This one drill that he does that's like a box or a rectangle, and the player is running basically to different corners of let's say a square or a rectangle, and just the movement skill is, for me, not very realistic, and it could have been a better choice. I think the system the Sanchez system, some of the drills that they use, the fundamental drills like the X drill, for example, is a much better basic drill for young kids than the drills that Toni chose for young children. I think the Bruguera method has better, simpler drills. The Bruguera method also uses the X drill and the inverse V and the forward V. Those, I think, are a better choice for young children in terms of their footwork pattern development than the ones that Toni chose. This is my opinion, obviously. Toni chose to introduce young children by moving forward, so the players move forward to seek the ball. That's something that Toni believes in wholeheartedly, that you have to seek the ball and move forward. He said that he did that from the youngest age with Rafael, that when Rafael was little, he would toss the ball in front of him, and Rafael would have to seek the ball by going forward. So Toni says that is very important for young kids. Compare that to some other Spanish methods where you're working more of the V early on, or you're working the X pattern early on. I think that footwork pattern is, I think it's actually a better footwork pattern for young kids to learn than just going forward only. And the box drill that Toni shows, it's a big part of his system. It's a little hard to explain just over the video here or on a podcast format. But basically he sets up 4 cones, and the player has to move in a rectangle or box, side shuffle, back pedal, side shuffle again, and then forward to hit a ball. And I just think that the drill is not that impressive, and it's one of the core drills of his U10 system, beginning system. So just from my personal coach's eye, I wasn't that impressed with that exercise. And unfortunately, some of the little boys, he has these little boys that he works with online in the online course, and their footwork is a little sloppy. In my opinion, it could be a lot better. I wish he had been more disciplined with them. I don't know if they were difficult to film. I've done a lot of filming myself, and sometimes the students are not that cooperative, or there's a lot of, some things can show up in a video that aren't as impressive as they could be. Some things can happen in production that don't show your exercises the way you'd like, and sometimes the video just doesn't come out quite the way you want it, and you don't have time to reshoot it. And there are lots of things that happen when you're producing video for digital content, that sometimes you lose a little bit of control in production or post-production, and I don't know what to say. In my opinion, as a junior developer, a lot of the footwork exercises that Toni was showing and doing were a little bit sloppy, a little messy. And that's not to say I don't think the philosophy is wrong. The philosophy is solid Spanish philosophy of focusing on the feet, focusing on the movement, focusing on getting in position with balance. But just the way the little kids that he chose, the way they demonstrated it, wasn't that great. And to be honest, I felt like he could have been more on top of that, like more on top of the kids, because this is an example where he wants to show his system, his method in the best light. And for whatever reason, I don't think some of those young students, some of the videos didn't come out that great in terms of the footwork skill that they were demonstrating. So anyway, I have little criticisms here and there. Overall, I would say the courses the philosophy is amazing. Some of the way the course is presented, maybe I can quibble with and find some fault in, but try to put in perspective. What I'm saying is you have an amazing philosophy here, an amazing method overall, and of course I'm gonna tell you guys my honest thoughts. That's what the show is all about. I try to give you guys the honest, straight dope. And in this case, that's something I was kind of horrified at some of the sloppy footwork that I saw in some of the young kids that Toni was coaching. Maybe from his perspective, he felt, hey, they're young, they're probably 6, 7 years old, and this is just the beginning class, so we're going to try to upgrade their footwork skills later. But it was a little bit shocking to me to see that. And sometimes with the balance too, Toni talked a lot about balance, but with many of the young kids in the videos, the balance demonstrated wasn't that great. Like I said, sometimes it just doesn't come through the way you'd want, or sometimes you don't get a chance to reshoot it, and sometimes you have players who are not cooperative. I know all about this from shooting my own online videos and programs and classes and things like that. So what else typifies the Nadal basic system? We talked about the footwork focus, the accompaniment, Accompaniment is huge. The rhythm is huge. Everything for Toni is about that. What is it not about? Like he doesn't get too much into the weeds. Too much into the details. Doesn't go after backswings. Very typical in Spain not to go after technical corrections for backswings. They just don't focus too much on that. They never talk about that. Toni never talked about it. Not once. Didn't talk about the ATP backswing or more compact backswing or things like that. I think throughout all of the courses, hours and hours, dozens of hours of videos, never mentioned the backswing. Keep it a little more, maybe on return or serve. He talked about being a little more compact. But you very rarely see Spanish coaches adjusting the backswing. They don't even look at it. They all seem to have this focus on the contact and the extension. And I really think it derives, I think the origin is from Bruguera and the Bruguera method. Luis was so instrumental to changing the coaching paradigm in Spain back in the 80s. There was a major drought in Spain in terms of there were no Grand Slam winners on the men's side since 1975, and Luis came along and revolutionized the teaching methodology in Spain in the 80s, and his son Sergi won the first Grand Slam in 18 years. I believe it's an 18-year drought in 1993. So you sort of have to understand the timeline here, and Luis is an incredibly charismatic figure. He's a lot like Toni. Toni is a slightly younger generation. So my take is that most of the coaches in Spain have been influenced to a greater or lesser degree by Luis and the Bruguera method. And this is an example of the Bruguera approach, which is also the approach for Toni, is where you zone in and you hyper-focus on the impact. You hyper-focus on the impact, the contact point, the extension through the contact point, and stability through the finish. That is very common in many academies and across Spain with different coaches from different lineages. And I think a lot of it comes from Luis Bruguera, if I had to try to find the source of that. And so Toni continues that. He puts his own spin on it, puts his own, he has his own names for things like accompaniment and the pause at the end. But essentially it's the idea of so many Spanish coaches are obsessed with the impact and how the body is arranged or organized to make a good impact. And that is a big part of the Spanish approach everywhere, not just in the Nadal system, but in the other systems that I mentioned and all across the country. But I think it goes back, if I have to try to pinpoint it, I really think it goes back to Luis and his work in the 80s, and because that is a primary focus of his method, and he predates Toni. Toni probably had a young in the 80s. Gosh, I think Nadal was born in the early 80s. So, Nadal was just a kid coming up who Toni was working with when Bruguera was having so much success on the world scene. And I think there's just, it's impossible that Toni was not heavily influenced by Bruguera's success in the 80s, because it was a really big deal in Spain when Bruguera started, when Sergio Bruguera started. He won the Spanish championships, and he became a Grand Slam winner in the early 90s. It was just an incredible story in Spain. It's impossible that someone like Toni, who is always very curious and trying to learn from other coaches, it's impossible that he wasn't curious about what Bruguera was doing with Sergi, and that he didn't want to take some of that information and weave it into his training with Rafael. I just find that's an impossibility, that there was no crossover there. And again, I'm surmising here. I am speculating, but I just have a hard time believing that there was no crossover from the Bruguera success, the method that he used in the 80s, and that none of that influenced Toni and in the development of the Nadal method. So my good friend Gordon Paul has a question. I see some of you guys have been hanging in here as I rap about Toni and the Spanish approach. I'm glad some of you find this interesting. I wonder how many people bought these courses. How many people are really interested in Toni's stories and his experiences and his approach. I'm curious how. I know he's a very famous coach. Is he one of the most famous coaches in the world? Probably, right? I wonder how many people bought the course. I wonder how many people believe Toni is as great a coach as I think he is. You know, sometimes people make the argument that, well, he never coached anyone else. And that is a good point. He has this wealth of experience with Rafa and Gordon. I'll get to your question in just one moment, but you know, he spent all of that time with one player, and that does limit your experience in some respects, because I always try to study with coaches who've had success across more than one player, with more than one player, and it's sometimes a red flag for me when I see that a coach has only had success with one player. But so that is on the one hand. On the other hand, you say, well, he had this amazing run or experience with the greatest player, one of the greatest athletes of all time, one of the greatest players of all time. I won't say the greatest, but I think fairly we can say that he's one of the greatest of all time. And, you know, that is something very special that I want to learn. I want to learn everything he learned. If I could, sometimes I dream of just being with Toni in those, imagine those early days, imagine those early years when Rafa was 7 or 8 or 9, and the excitement that he must have had when he saw that his nephew had some ability, you know, and maybe could be a great player, and that he had his, you know, Rafa was always very focused, and he was coachable, and he had tremendous speed and athletic ability. It must have been very exciting to see the development year over year, and to watch him grow. And I would have loved to have been there with Toni as a fly on the wall, or as an observer during those years. And I think the closest you can get to that are these courses, or getting out to the academy itself and spending time with him. But I don't think you're going to get nearly the access in person as you'll get through the online classes, because Toni is relatively secretive. He's guarded, and he doesn't give up his time easily. I managed to snag a day with him a couple of years back when I was writing an article, but that was not easy, and it's hard to get access to Toni at all in person. So I just think these stories that he shares, the experiences that he shares, the anecdotes, the wisdom is very rare wisdom, very rare knowledge that you just can't find anywhere else. So I think there's a lot of value in the stories that he tells, and you can only get access to those through the online classes at the moment. There is an option to go and follow up study at the academy, but again, even then, it's hard to get time with Toni. He's a tough guy to grab and pin down. And even then, for someone like me, my Spanish is not very good. I don't think I could get into the depth of conversation with Toni or understand him as he's coaching on the court in person as I can with these classes. As I mentioned, one of the thing that's really amazing about the courses is that they're all translated. They're not just translated into English. They have multiple translations into German, into French, I believe. There's several other translations. So it's just an amazing project. Just imagine the project. First, you have to go and get all this video professionally filmed, and then you have to have it all translated from Spanish. It's just a tremendous body of work that time and energy that the production company put in, and also that Toni put in on his end. Pretty incredible. Okay, let me get back to your question, Gordon. Gordon says, but I focus on the backswing. Yeah, I do, because I believe in training the backswing, because I believe that when you ignore the backswing, it can create limitations in your game in the future. So I've studied with other great coaches. I've studied with Macy a lot. I follow Macy a lot, and you know that he's a big believer in the compact backswing, and I'm a big believer in that as well. So I'm willing to step away from the Spanish approach when I think that it's warranted. And in this case, I think that's something that in Spain they could do better. They could focus a little more on cleaning up, polishing the backswings of their players, because ultimately, if you have too loopy a backswing, it's going to affect your court position. Usually players with bigger backswings have to give up more ground, and they can't play as much on the rise, or they can't hold court position as well. I'm generalizing, but typically that's the case. And that has been a limitation for some Spanish players. Also with the grips in Spain, well, now you see a bifurcation, because you see there are certainly some modern Spanish coaches who want clean grips, and they don't want to be limited with extreme grips. They don't want to be limited on fast service. They don't want a disadvantage on fast surfaces. So you see some younger generation Spanish coaches who are big believers in clean grips, and that's another technical example of where they couldn't. Many in Spain could improve, because there's still many Spanish coaches, traditional, let's say, I don't know what to call them, traditional Spanish coaches, maybe older guard, older generation, who really don't care, don't even look at the grip. Like whatever it is, what it is. It's Western, Hawaiian, it's East. They don't even look at it that much. It could be anything, extreme, semi-Western. And so I think if you have a system that ignores grips and ignores backswings, inevitably you're going to end up with some players who have some limitations on fast courts. And there are now smart Spanish coaches in the younger guard, sort of younger generation, or maybe they're just a little more cutting edge, who are trying to build players that are more clean with the backswings and more clean with the grips. You see examples like that with Roberto Bautista Agut, and some of the other top Spanish players now who are coming up. Carreño Busta comes to mind, for example. There are a lot of guys down in Alicante and the Valencia area with a little bit cleaner grips, and I think it just depends on the Spanish coach. It's not just the region; it's the coach philosophy, the development coach philosophy. So another example of that was Juan Carlos Ferrero. And I think the Ferrero shop at Equilite, the Equilite Ferrero Academy in Vienna, which is basically close to Alicante, which is south of Barcelona, about 5 hours south of Barcelona. And that region, the Valencia region down there, so this is outside of Catalonia, that area, it may come from Juan Carlos's coach. I think it may. I haven't had a chance to study with him closely, but I think it started in that region, especially with the model of Juan Carlos, who was very clean with his technique and was able to play very well on fast courts, and had compact backswings, and was able to hold position better than some of the other Spanish players, especially Spanish players from the Bruguera model. So Bruguera is a method that doesn't really limit grips or backswings, things like that. Again, the obsession is with the impact. The obsession is with the body's position at impact, and also accelerating through that impact. The Bruguera system is obsessed with acceleration, which is something that Toni is not obsessed with. So there's the difference, by the way. The Nadal system emphasizes fluidity and maybe that's not a fair characterization. Definitely in the younger years, fluidity and slower swing. But it's true that Toni says how hard you hit the ball is determinant. So in the end, Toni knows that the acceleration is huge. So I don't even know if I could say that. But definitely in the younger years, Toni doesn't stress acceleration that much. And acceleration and racket speed is a big part of the Bruguera model. But I think with the young kids at Bruguera, they don't overload the kids too much with acceleration. They focus on that when the kids get older into their teenage years. So Gordon had a follow-up. I'll try to get to that. Gordon says, if Toni isn't going to focus on the backswing, that would mean another coach will have to do the job down the line. So Toni is interesting because he kind of has he has a very eclectic philosophy. You can see that, and I think it makes sense because he has a high intelligence, and he's known for always being curious and learning from different coaches. And in this he has basically a growth mindset. He's constantly learning and trying to improve, which is another sign of a great coach, I think. And for Toni, you can see that he's pulled from a number of disparate systems and he's learned from different coaches over the years, especially traveling on tour. And so he has definitely parts of his system are cutting edge and more modern, I would say. And then there are other parts that sort of reveal, I don't mean to say it in a pejorative way, but that sort of reveal that this is a guy who never played top level himself and essentially was a club coach for however many years in basically a local club coach in Spain, and sort of lucked out that he was gifted one of the greatest athletes of all time. You sort of see a little bit of that in some parts of his system, and then in other parts of the system that are really strong, you see the coach, the legend, the guy who has been on tour 20-some years with one of the greatest players of all time, and who's learned so much from those experiences. So that's take it for what you want, guys. That's how I interpreted watching Toni on court, working with various levels of players. And sometimes I think the local club coach came through, like when he's trying to teach the serve, for example. Not impressed at all. The things that Toni says to young kids or even intermediate kids when they're working on the serve, I'm sorry, you can see that he's not that comfortable teaching the serve. Toni Nadal, one of the greatest coaches of all time, he doesn't look comfortable teaching the serve. He gives very little feedback to the players, and he gives very little instruction, and especially, I would say, salient instruction, memorable instruction. What he does say is what the average coach at your local park would know, and it I think reveals a lack of sophistication regarding the serve from in his coaching. And so that is my critique of that. And on the other hand, you see that he's extremely strong in tactics, extremely strong in the mental side and character development, extremely strong when working with higher level players, different exercises, creative exercises, and tactical games. I was very, very impressed with his knowledge and the depth of the sophistication with which he approaches working with advanced players, especially in tactical games and live ball exercises, things like that. Not very impressed with Toni working on a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old serve or an intermediate's. I want to say even the ground stroke and even the technical work with the ground strokes and the volleys for beginners and intermediates was pretty basic. It's definitely doesn't look like his wheelhouse, and I think it makes sense because here's a guy who's focused most of his life doing what? He's been working with a professional player. He went through it with one player, with Rafa when he was young. So on that side of the coin, it's amazing. It's incredible unique journey. It's an incredibly unique journey, but on the other hand, it was only one kid you were working with, so you didn't get to build hundreds and hundreds of serves with a young kid, or you didn't get with young children. You didn't get to build hundreds and hundreds of ground stroke games with different players, different genders. Let's put it that way. Toni does not. I would, in my opinion, I don't think he looks that comfortable working with girls. Like, he spent his formative years with one guy. So he doesn't look quite as comfortable with female players and with younger players. And on the technical side, I think he reveals a lack of sophistication and experience, perhaps training that cohort. But at the same time, you can see that he has this amazing repository of knowledge and this amazing skill that he's developed working with more advanced players, especially male players. So that's sort of my take on it, and you guys can watch the courses and classes for yourself and make your own determination. But if you want to, go by through my eyes, kind of see through my eyes and and use my intelligence to try to discern what are the strengths and weaknesses. That's sort of what I saw in his coaching. And I still think you can still be a legend and not be great at everything. And I think most of the greatest coaches of all time, they have strengths and weaknesses. They have some things that they do really well and some things that they don't have as much experience in. So, for example, I'm very confident that I can teach a better serve than Toni Nadal can teach a young child. I've been focusing on serve technique. I've been studying biomechanics for years. I've been working with literally hundreds and hundreds of kids, different cohorts, different groups of kids, girls, boys, from 5 to 12 years old. I've been doing that for the last decade. I would stack my experience up against almost anyone, probably in the world, building the serve, for example. And you can just see that Toni doesn't have a lot of insight there. And to be honest, I've said this about most Spanish coaches. I don't know what the deal is over there, but I have some theory about it. But I've mentioned this on many previous shows that they just don't do a great job teaching the serve in general in Spain. That goes across all the lineages in Spain and all academies and all regions of Spain. That just, I theorize that it's just the history of the clay court game there, where the serve traditionally was just to start the point, and that still sort of lingers in Spain. It's starting to change a little bit, but you just see so many coaches there who lack a sophistication, an understanding of the biomechanics of the serve, and who are teaching the serve well. There's so many coaches is just the serve is neglected by them. Or it's just not understood very well biomechanically. And I just think you see this very similar phenomenon in the Toni Nadal system. What can I say? And in that method, the serve is not a strength. Let's to put it mildly. And another thing that's kind of interesting about the serve development with Toni is he strongly believes that serving too much can hurt your shoulder. So he's very conservative about how many serves you should do in a row. For example, he recommends 20 serves only in a row at any one time, and that if you're going to serve more than that, he strongly advises that you take breaks. So if that's true, and he really adheres to that number, I think that alone would probably stunt the serve development of just about any athlete, unless they're extremely special talent with the overhead movement. You can see, for example, with Rafa that he always struggled with his serve. Part of it possibly because Toni chose to train him lefty. He's a right-handed player. He's a right-handed athlete. He's right-hand dominant, and Toni chose to switch him to left-handed serving and left-handed playing when, I don't know the exact age, but Rafa used to play with two hands on both sides until a certain age, under 10, I don't know the exact age, and then Toni chose to switch him to a lefty. He thought that would be an advantage, and I think time has shown that it is a big advantage. It has been a big advantage for Rafa, but you could also argue that maybe the serve, he struggled to learn the serve, the overhand movement on that by switching to the left-hand side when he was a natural righty. Maybe he would have had a better right-handed serve. We don't know. But nevertheless, Toni's philosophy of only doing 20 serves at a time, because doing more may cause injury, that I think would really hinder the development of a good serve for most athletes. Because sometimes, I'm not saying you should go out and do 200 in a bucket without a rest. You should definitely be careful. He's absolutely right that you should be careful in the quantity of that you serve. But at the same time, if you have a very strict quota of serves and you're not flexible about letting a kid, get into the zone and work through some issues and do more than 20 at a time, I think that could definitely contribute to difficulty mastering the serve. And you see a lot of Spanish players who struggle with the serve. They don't have a great serve. Part of it is philosophically in the country where they typically have, or historically have seen the serve as just a way to start the point. You just kind of spin it in and get it going. And part of it may stem from the philosophy that Toni espouses, where he says that you really shouldn't serve that much because it's a risk. It's an injury risk. That is a very healthy philosophy, but it could also be a very dangerous philosophy, because if you really believe that and you limit the serving of your players too much, it could have a negative effect on the overall serve development over time, because your players are just not actually doing that throwing motion that much. And as you know, or most of you probably know, in Spain they don't do any throwing sports. They play a lot of soccer with their feet. So imagine you have a lot of young kids playing soccer all the time, and then on the tennis court the coaches strongly believe in limiting the amount of serves that you should be doing, just as a safeguard. They're trying to prevent injury, but it could have a deleterious effect on serve mastery for countless numbers of kids in Spain. So it's a double-sided sword, right? You definitely want to be careful with the quantity that you serve, but at the same time you don't want to limit serving too much, because you want your kids to have a big weapon, develop a big serve that is critical on the pro tour these days. So anyway, just kind of interesting talking about the serve. And Toni, he's very strict. He's adamant about that. He's adamant that players should be very cautious with how many balls they hit at one time. So, I'd like to just talk briefly about Toni's model of character development and then answer the mailbox. And it's getting late, guys. I think I should try to wrap up after that. But so there's so much to talk about within the Toni Nadal approach, and I mean, I will promise you a few more podcasts and shows on this, because I do want to talk about intermediate course more, and especially Toni's advanced course, which I think is really good. Has a lot of great games and tactical exercises, and I definitely want to do a show more on the wisdom and the character development aspect. I mentioned that in episode 28, the last show. I think it was the last show. I talked about how I'd like to maybe just dedicate an entire show to character development, but I think I want to save that for later, sometime in 2020. But let's talk a little bit about character development. For Toni, I think this is his greatest genius, character development. Maybe second, maybe close behind for him would be his brilliance in his tactical approach. And because I mentioned I'm not too impressed with his technical ability, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean he's not a great. I would say the same thing about Nick Bollettieri. Nick Bollettieri is a tremendous tennis coach, and I definitely would not bring my young kid to Nick to learn strokes. He's just not nuts and bolts kind of coach. He's not a junior technique developer. He's very good at motivation, very good at tactics, and I think that Toni is along those lines, similarly gifted in those respects. But for Toni, he has this very unique take on character development. So the primary thrust is that the character that you develop, the values that you hold, they're not just for being a better person or being or building, contributing better to society. They're actually going to make you a more successful athlete. And that is a major point of his, big part of his philosophy, a very important part of his method is that you need to teach children character. You need to be demanding of them. You need to they need to be well behaved. He's a big believer that children need to be well behaved. And it sounds a little bit old-fashioned the way he says it, but his point is that being well behaved will contribute to your success on the tennis court and also in life. His argument is that you will have a better chance of success in tennis if you're well behaved. That's his essential argument, which you don't hear very often. I've actually never heard that argument before. And it's striking. I could debate it both ways because, and Toni admits this, that there have been players historically over time who were not very well behaved and they were successful. But what Toni says, and Toni admits this, he says it's true. It's true that there are examples of successful champions who are not well behaved, who don't have a great character. But he says they're more rare than they're less common than the ones who have good behavior, the champions who have good character, and also that the road that they made for themselves was much harder because of their lack of character development. And Toni adamantly, sincerely believes this. He's very passionate about how that character will help you be a greater success, not just in life, but especially in tennis. And so he goes on to say, as a corollary, or to prove his point, he says that, for example, who does a coach want to work with more? A player who is well behaved or a player who is not? A player who is respectful or a player who is disrespectful? A player who is rude, a player who is difficult? He says that it's natural that coaches will want to help the well-behaved player more than coaches would want to help a player who is a problem and who doesn't have good values, doesn't have good behavior. So that's one of his primary arguments to support his thesis. He says that the behavior is really determinant on your success. In most cases, he admits that there are exceptions. He admits that there are exceptions, and probably if you try to say this to your students, I've talked to my students about it. I've talked about it in my academy, in my summer camp, for example. We have some character development sessions, and we talk about, this is one of the philosophies that I talked about. And some kids will raise their hand and say, well, what about Kyrgios? What about McEnroe? What about Connors? Players who maybe are, or whoever the example, or from any sport. You can think of from all sports. There are champions who are very well behaved, and there are champions who are, let's say, they're a little more naughty, and they make some bad choices, And I think you have to admit that, yes, you can be a champion with bad behavior, but the key is it's going to be a harder road. You make the road harder for yourself. Also very important, Toni says, and he argues that players who are not in control of their emotions, players who are not in control of themselves, they're not in control of their choices, players who have a lot of big outbursts, basically players who are not well behaved, it's going to be a less efficient road to the top. Because if you're not well behaved, you're going to get distracted, You may be a distraction for others in your group or academy. You're going to be You're going to get distracted because you lose control of your emotions, and you're not going to be able to focus as better. You're not going to be as good a learner. So that's really critical for as part of the Nadal philosophy of character building. He says that learning is the most important talent. He talks about that a lot. Toni talks about how learning, your ability to learn, I think he says to aprender, I think that's the word in Spanish. Your ability to learn is determinant. That to be the most success you can be, you have to be a good learner. And you have to work on that. It's like a skill that you have to hone and develop. And he says that this is huge for him. One of the biggest reasons why kids don't learn well is because they're poorly behaved. For example, you take a lesson, or you have a kid in the lesson, and the kid is a madman. The kid's a maniac, right? The kid is very difficult, having outbursts all the time. And if a kid is like that, they're not learning. If a kid has a terrible temper, if a kid is not able to stay in control of their faculties, even they're not going to learn efficiently. They're gonna put a roadblock in front of the path to progress and to their improvement, right? So that is a huge part of his system. He believes that all the players, and this is a big part of the Nadal Academy, by the way, they're very big on character development, and they're very big on the behavior of the players there. In fact, I think it's a great strength of their academy, because it comes straight from Toni. And Toni, it's part of his ethos, it's part of his core, that you have to be well behaved, you have to have good character to give yourself the best chance to succeed in tennis. And forget about life. He says life, yes, but he's talking about in your sport or in your career even. And for athletes who are trying to go pro, their sport is their life. It is their career. He's saying that coaches will want to help you more if you're well behaved, and that you will be a better learner if you're well behaved. You will get better help from all the people on the journey that you meet, and you will be able to learn and pick up skills faster and progress faster in this same by being well behaved. And he says it's not impossible to be a champion if you're a lunatic, because there are examples of that, and in life too. You can probably think of some people right now who are very successful, who are maybe not the best at controlling their emotions or their feelings, and maybe have very poor behavior at times. There are a lot of examples of that in the world, but what he's saying is there are a lot more examples. It's much more common that people who are well behaved, people who are respectful, people who have good values, that those people rise to the top because they learn better and more people are likely to help them along the way. So that's sort of a little summary of the Toni Nadal character building philosophy. I'd love to get into it a little more in a future podcast and show, but I find it a good argument. I think it's the best argument that I've seen for kids to be well behaved. It's a very good argument to teach values. A lot of times those are separate from the tennis development. You see that coaches and parents will sometimes put those as separate virtues. Okay, we're going to work on tennis, but maybe I don't want the tennis coach to spend time on the character development side, and maybe leave that to the parents, or they're sometimes seen as separate tracks. And what Tony's saying is he doesn't believe that at all. He believes that that's a myth and it's false to put character development and tennis development on separate tracks. In his opinion, in his sincere belief, it's his sincere belief that they are intricately interwoven, that character development and your success as an athlete are vitally connected. And that is a core component of his method. Okay, let me get to the grab bag real quick because I want to help my buddy. I believe my buddy in India is training his kids. And he asked me a few ideas for developing the serve technique for U10 and the kick serve for U10. So what are my go-to exercises? Let's see. So I think, and I've talked about this before, but the most important thing for the serve for U10 is probably the power position, the L shape. I call it the L shape. So getting a good power position, and also learning to use the legs properly and jumping up into the ball, getting a good extension. So a lot of the exercises that I use for U10 are going to be focusing on a good jump, a good explosion from the ground, and in addition, trying to get that great L-shaped trophy position. So I have a number of resources on this for my amigo from India, and I guess I will link them on the show notes. So please check the show notes for the resources. I have a number of videos that are, I think we have some free ones on YouTube, and they go into the details of the L shape, which is the power position or the trophy position, and the leg, some leg drive exercises. So I'm a big believer in teaching the leg drive and jumping into the serve at a young age. I'm not a big proponent of static serving where you serve just from a stable base. I know a lot of coaches teach the serve like that. They teach the serve in a static way. I like to get a dynamic load and a dynamic jump, basic, a lot of energy from the lower body. I like to teach that very early on, so that could be at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 years old, anytime under 10. I think that will really help you, my friend. But so basically you're looking for a good load in the back leg, primarily for a right-handed player, the right leg, 60%, 70% loading, 60. Typically I say 60-40, but however you want to, if you want to exaggerate it a little, because a little extra back leg loading, a good drive up into the air, and then a good landing for the little superstars. The landing is key. The balance. I have a lot of drills for balance with the serve, but I like to focus there on the foundation, the explosion, and the landing with balance. And then so on the flip side, or on the other side of the coin, you want to work a lot on the hand positioning and the arm positioning, and that is the L shape or the trophy position. So most kids have just a disaster in the L shape, a disaster in the trophy position. They don't maintain a good rhythm of the arms, and at the top, as they start bringing the racket up, a lot of times the racket will go into like the waiter position, or the racket will prematurely back scratch. That's a really big one, is the racket's dropping into the back scratch area before the legs drive. It should ideally be, the racket should be dropping at about the same time that the legs are driving upwards, and so the legs are sort of triggering the racket drop and the racket acceleration, and that's not what you see with most kids. Most kids, they're taught to put the racket on their shoulder or behind their neck and then serve from there. That is just it should be outlawed in under 10 serve coaching. You should not start kids that way. You want to start kids with a good L shape, good power position, and train them that way, and then they can accelerate from that L position. You should not start kids with the racket on the neck or on the back, typically, because it creates a big hitch, and it gets them comfortable with pausing in the back scratch, you really shouldn't be pausing. You should be accelerating through the back scratch. And so you have to be really careful with any kind of exercises where you put the racket on the back. I have one exercise that I love for that, to build the acceleration and spin, but I use it very judiciously, and I'm very careful to link it with other drills that emphasize holding the L shape and then accelerating up to the ball. So I hope some of that comes through via this format, via video or audio for you, my amigo. And I'll give you a few ideas on the kick serve too. With the kick serve, I have extensive resources for that. I've written a number of articles on building the kick serve. I have videos on the kick serve. We're doing a big workshop coming up. Maybe I can convince you to to purchase that. We're going to sell that at our online school. It won't be very expensive. Most of the courses that we sell at the online school are like $39 per class, and I think that's quite reasonable for a good online course. The courses, by the way, if you guys are interested, I'll just mention they are at clta.teachable.com. You can check out all of the online school there. We have a lot of digital programs there that you can purchase at clta.teachable.com. That's our online school. And so we have I'm doing a workshop, high performance workshop at my club on December 23rd. So that's coming up. If any of you guys are in the Northeast United States and you want to come visit and spend a day with me, you can bring your player or players, and we will be working on the kick serve, by the way, all day. We will probably serve more than 20 serves at a time, and I hope Uncle Tony doesn't disapprove too much. But we'll be serving a lot. We'll be also doing some high-speed video study in the classroom up there at my club. We have a big video screen and a high-speed connection, so we can do some biomechanics study. Stay tuned for that. And kick serve drills. What are my go-to drills for U10 players? Okay, for the one that I love is you focus on the tricep extension and the brushing with the elbow and the wrist, so the movement of the elbow and the wrist. I have a good free video on our YouTube channel for that. If you're interested in the videos that we have on YouTube, those are absolutely free, and they're at the YouTube channel is just Chris Lewit. You search Chris Lewit and you can go there, and we have a lot of free resources there. So there's a number of good videos there at the YouTube channel. And what else do I like for kick serves? With young kids, it's tricky. You have to be very careful teaching the kick serves. Very important not to get too much bend in the back, especially the lower back. The upper back is more flexible, so you can get some thoracic extension. But please be careful when you're teaching the kick serve to young children that the lower back, the lumbar spine is stable and straight, and that there's not an excessive bend or extension, hyperextension of the lower back. So the lower back should be very straight. The upper back can flex. It's not the biomechanical term. It's extend. You can extend. There can be a bend, and the neck can bend a lot to look up to the ball, and that's critical for the kick serve. It's really important to get young kids to put their chest up to the ball and extend, literally hyperextend their neck so that their face is looking directly up at the bottom of the ball. And then there's a lot of other components to the kick serve. It's quite a complicated technique. But there has to be a very good tricep extension and brushing or scraping movement with the elbow and the wrist and the arms or the shoulders accelerating up, and there has to be a good brushing with elbow and wrist. The toss needs to be slightly to the left. It doesn't need to be, but it's easier to learn, in my opinion. The toss is between 11 and 12 o'clock. And the body has to stay sideways. That's another critical aspect of the kick serve, especially when you're teaching young children. Most young children will rotate their bodies like they're throwing a ball, and the shoulders will open up, which is what should happen on a typical flat serve or power serve. But on a kick serve, very important to keep the shoulders sideways up through impact. And that is a very odd, strange feeling for a young kid to get there, and most kids will not be able to hit a kick serve well unless they learn how to stay sideways as they're accelerating upward with the tricep extension. So those are some key components, and I will link in the show notes to a few drills for kick serve with young kids or whatever we have on our channel. And maybe, if possible, you could catch the workshop. I know you're from India, so it may not be able to get to my club here in Vermont. But with the magic of the internet and digital education now, we're able to. We have been filming all of my workshops. We plan to film this one, and then we'll put it up on the online school, and you can get a whole day with me. Digital day with me by taking the course, and then I can work with you via email. I have a lot of players and families who I'm helping via email, and they're big fans of my classes and my online classes, and I have a number of parents using my system to work with their children, but especially for the kick serve, I think I have an excellent method. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of really good kick serves to young kids, and I think that's a stroke that I know very, very well. So anyway, I can help more with resources or with drills or with specific technical advice for your son or daughter. Please let me know. It's an honor for me to be able to help. And whether it's with the basic mechanics of the serve or with the kick serve specifically, either one, I love working on the serve and had a lot of success building serves over the years. So good luck to you, my amigo. Guys, it's been an amazing show. It's getting late in the night, and as Sammy likes to do, I think it's maybe time for a sleepy night soon. But I appreciate all the waves. I saw a lot of well-known coaches joining the program and listening in tonight. I appreciate you guys tuning in and supporting the show. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you learned a little bit about Toni and his method, and I promise to do some more shows on the subject in the future, because his body of work is very impressive and quite broad, and so his system will take more than 1 hour just to explain and to really dig into. So I'm looking forward to sharing more on the Toni Nadal system. I'm looking forward to doing more shows on Spanish tennis training, one of my true passions in my career. And guys, I would like to remind you to please give the show a thumbs up. To see another thumbs up on the board, thank you so much for the thumbs up. Please tell your friends about the show. Help us grow our audience. And if you know anyone who has a kid who loves tennis and is working on their technique, or parents who need help with junior development questions, this is what I love to do, guys. Love to help and love to give parents the resources they need to help their children on the difficult journey, often difficult journey of becoming a world-class tennis player. So thank you, guys. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the shares. Remember, all the shows will be replayed on our YouTube channel. They're all they will be archived there. And remember that every show that we do now is available as a podcast. So if you're not able to watch the show, don't worry. You can catch the show in podcast format. We're on all the podcast directories now. If you just search my name, Chris Lewit, or you search the Prodigy Maker Show, you can catch all the archives of our podcast as well. Thank you so much. I will see you on the next program. God bless. Have a good night.